When the rain finally stopped and the water subsided, the animals, wet but alive, went back to the ocean, the desert, the mountains. But we wanted to talk about it. So we sang it and we danced it and we painted it. And if it could tell us what we knew, maybe it could tell us what we didn't know, where we come from before life, where we go after life, what's funny, what's sacred. We began to traffic in the alphabet, brag about our opposable thumbs or heightened sense of self. We found ritual, and sometimes it brought us together. Other times we tore apart into that place before right, before wrong, to the white hot, to the spark. And then it started to rain. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, folks from uptown, downtown, overbearing and underprivileged. Welcome, voters, teetotalers, pessimists, and optometrists. Mopers, dopers, slippery slopers, confessors, professors, cross-dressers, demigods, quadrupods, goon squads, outlaws, in-laws, Lawsons, Larsons, Johnsons, sons of the pioneers of the deserts, DARs, OMGs, and VIPs. Welcome, diplomats, autocrats, Mickey and Minnie and Plutocrats. Welcome, rhinos, winos, albinos, and by extension, any and all I have not mentioned. Over the last 10 years, this group, we've performed here every August in this little gem of a theater. And we always make sure to try to stretch ourselves in this performance, to risk a little bit. If faith is letting go of one hand in the dark to reach for another, a lot of times you've been that other hand. So we're going to go back over these 10 years and revisit some of these plays and see what seeds were planted. Because there's the trip you plan, and then there's the trip you take. This was never more evident than this millennium. When we came into this new millennium, we had all this purpose, all this drive, and all this adrenaline. And then not a year into it, 9/11 happened to the Twin Towers. And I had a motorcycle accident that same month, and I was in the hospital, and I learned that post-traumatic stress can happen on a personal level and on a cultural level. Loss is loss. In fact, Odysseus, when he returned from the Trojan War, it took him 12 years, and he figured that was so he could become a loving husband for his worthy wife. So I'm looking back at these 10 years. What's the trajectory in this time? I was just last summer in Ireland, and I was on a boat, and I was trying to get up a ladder, so of course I'm having this hard time. And this boat captain, he hadn't said anything all week, and he looks down at me and he says, "Every man goes out of his mind in his own way." And I remember from my hospital bed, I remember watching the Twin Towers falling over and over and over. And I knew then that healing can't occur when it's on a cycle of violence. We need to move forward. We need to go epic. The Greeks' word for spirit was their same word as for their breath. When we breathe, we inspire, we expire. We inhale, we exhale. Every inhale is a chance for a laugh, a cry, a story, a song. Every conversation is an exchange of spirit, the words flowing bitter or sweet over the tongue. The spirit, something sacred between teller and listener. A good story, it works like an apple, the flavor of an apple. We don't really know between the teller and the listener, is the flavor in the mouth or in the apple? So tonight we visit 10 years of juicy bits on this stage, 8 shows. And if the Greeks are right, a good story works like a loom, in that vertically runs the metaphor, horizontally runs the sequence. And where they come together, they weave their invisible threads for their cloaks of immortality. Every hero's journey begins at home. Home. We are all creatures of landscape, and home is our clay. I mean, what kind of clay do you come from? A peaceful meadow or a craggy cliff? Because when we recognize somebody on meeting them, we're recognizing our clay. Home is where we learn how to cry, what's funny, what's sacred, where we belong. Okay, this is one of my favorite words, belonging, a paradox. To be somewhere and long to be somewhere else. Home is our launching pad. My dad used to say, Kevin, you can go anywhere if you know where you're from. We're each the hero of our own journey. One very unlikely hero was a man I knew named Marty. Now, Marty, he was going to be a farmer. I mean, it was pretty certain. His dad was a farmer, and his dad before him was a farmer. There's a plaque at the Minnesota State Fair with families going back 150 years. Marty's family's on that plaque. When he'd go to bed at night, whereas most kids clutch a teddy bear and a blanket, Marty clutched an ear of corn. His dad was one of those Teutonic farmers, those German farmers, as wide as he was tall. In fact, they used to say if it wasn't for the direction of his buttons, they wouldn't have known if he was laying down or standing up. And his mom was one of those farmers, Teutonic again, German farmers, everything in its right place. And her kitchen was like an artist studio. And whatever Marty's father provided as a medium was instantly transformed, teased, poached, pickled. I mean, pickled everything. If Marty's dad could cut it off, his mom could pickle it. Now, every hero has that invitation where they're invited to take a journey, and home is never the same again. And for Marty, that happened in church. One week he was in church and he heard the pastor say, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." Now this stunned Marty. When he was in Sunday school class later on, working on a Plato topographic map of the Holy Land, Marty pondered on what the pastor had said. Okay, if thou shalt have no other gods before me, then there must be other gods. I mean, God said so. God wouldn't lie. Why would God lie? Nobody could beat up God. But just to make sure, Marty asked the Sunday school teacher, Miss Walker, can Jesus' dad beat up Buddha?"
Yes, Marty, Jesus' dad can beat up Buddha.
Oh, Miss Walker, can Jesus' dad beat up Allah?
Yes, Marty, Jesus' dad can beat up Allah.
Oh, Miss Walker, can Jesus' dad beat up Odin?
Well, now that'd be a good fight. But yes, Marty, Jesus' dad can beat up Odin.
Marty tasted the Play-Doh. Salty. Not as good as public school Play-Doh, but pretty good. Okay. So if thou shalt have no other gods before me, that meant there were other gods. Gods of love, of hate, of color, of song. I mean, how far would this go? Where would this stop?
Martin?
Huh?
Martin Gross.
What?
Oh, your lips. Your lips.
A bluish green outlined Marty's lips, and when he looked down, he realized he'd eaten over half the Fertile Crescent. Now, every good story is a love story, and this is true for Marty as well. He could tell there were those bursting with art, and that art looked for the easiest flow out of the body, like a painter's hand was always moving. A singer's breath took on the rhythms of the world, but a dancer's whole body got to move. Marty's school didn't encourage dance, so he took trumpet, third chair in the worst band, the cadet band, all 7th graders, and Marty, a 9th grader. Now, Mark Twain said that Wagner's music is better than it sounds. Well, everybody's music is better than it sounded when Marty's band played it. I mean, when they played it, it sounded like there was a bee trapped in your head somewhere. At the Wall of Jericho, they could have been the band that prevented structural damage, because I'm sure the Canaanites would have said, "Just stop, we'll come out, please just stop." Now, Marty had to admit to being part of the problem. Whenever the band would play a song and finish, Marty always had a little extra music left over to play. Or he would finish and the band would keep going, and he'd have to pick up his horn and pretend he had more to do. But one time he was playing the Hogan's Heroes March, and lo and behold, he finished at the same time as the band, a miracle. And then the band director said, "Very good, band. And now we'll play the Hogan's Heroes March." It was in band class that Marty started to notice girls. He was strangely attracted to the woodwinds, but those clarinet players had that look of consternation. That oboe player looked like she might blow a gasket. But the flute players, the flutes, during measures of rest with his instrument tacit, Marty would think of good posture, embouchure, and Shelley Randazza, third chair flute, second from the end. And it was after a football game at the instrument bins that Marty asked her out, and she said yes. Click. Marty was in love. At Giacchino's Pizza, he listened intently as she talked about her embarrassing parents, their turkey farm, and her brothers and sisters. She wondered if happiness was a state of euphoria or merely the absence of fear. Marty didn't care. He was in love. And then she said she liked band but had really taken an interest in art. And Marty said he too had taken an interest and in fact was in a course offered in school called art. She asked if he had sketches back in his room. Why, yes, he did. He did have sketches back in his room. They were off, and he went back to the room and showed her his portfolio and the human figures and how the hands and feet give him the most trouble, as you can see by the shoes and mittens. And then, when he thought it couldn't get any better, she said she wanted to, buy a painting. Of course, said Marty. The thought of one of her paintings in her house in her room made his head spin. Then she leaned into him and said, "It feels good to buy art." Marty said, "I know." He never forgot that night. That night he kissed Shelley and knew he was an artist.
I'm gonna send my kisses like birds, hoping they migrate to him. Send my kisses, oh, like birds, for keeping them home. I might tame them.
My My earliest memory puts me on my father's knee, and he's pointing up to the stars, and he goes, "You see that star, Kevin?" So I reach up my tiny hand, I go, "Gah." And my dad goes, "You want to touch it?" "Gah." He said, "No, let's leave that star there, Kevin. With that star there, you can go anywhere in the world. That star can take you to places never seen by another. But more importantly, that star can bring you home again." Gah! Had my infant tongue been more explicit, I could have explained to him, "No, Father, the universe isn't a machine, it's a creator. That's why our lives are stories, not syllogisms. And I don't want to use that star as a vector. No, I want to go there. Because if I can get to that star, it's a short hop to the next, to the next, to the next. And in no time, I'm hunting with Orion. I'm cartwheeling with Cassiopeia. I'm trafficking with the gods, drinking their wine, eating their meat. No, Father, get me to that star, and I'm never coming home." God. To fly, to leave the nest, to cut loose. There's a momentum in flight, like a good story, like riding a motorcycle. We're held aloft by momentum. You stop and you fall over. And this is when you learn that balance is actually maintaining states of imbalance. Einstein proved that gravity isn't a pull. Gravity is actually a push. So are we pushed from the nest or pulled from the nest? Flight is also perspective, a view from above. To fly, every time you look at something, the direction you look at it from is a different story. And to look from above is to see the entire story. Or fly higher and look up like Icarus, going higher and higher. I don't know if you know this about Americans. Okay. Americans have what's called the long gene, and this is true. It's a genetic anomaly that's found more of America than anywhere else on the planet. It's an anomaly that's found in people that break away from society. Explorers tend to have it, adventurers, the whatever happened to's in their high school reunions, whose last words are, "Watch this," or "What's this do?" Now, my dad was definitely a member of the Long Gene Club. He always had these experimental aircrafts, and I'd be at Gustavus. I went to Gustavus at Office. And I'd be at school, and I'd hear this plane buzzing the campus, meh, prop back, flaps up, meh. And I'd turn to the kid next to me, I go, "My dad's here, my dad's here." And I would rush to the airport, which was a mile from campus, and their dad would be with the props still going around on the plane. And I'd hop up on the wing, get in the plane, we'd pull the cowling over, and then Dad and I would fly down the Minnesota River Valley, the leaves changing so beautifully in the fall. So one time we're flying down the river valley, and we hit a fog bank. I mean, you couldn't see anything. And I look over at my dad, and like usual, he's shelling peanuts, drinking hot coffee, unfolding a map, and tapping an instrument. And he turns to me and he goes, "Hey, Kev, do me a little favor. Look out that window. See if you can spot the ground." So I'm looking out the window when I hear my dad say, "Hey, Kev, it might not be down." Now, the thing I remember most about my dad, see, I'm the age I remember my dad most. And so when I look in the mirror, I expect to see him looking back at me, but I don't look anything like my dad. But I do have these sayings that spring from my lips. Sayings that don't make any sense to me at all. Like, it's hotter than a $3 pistol. Or it's colder than old Billy Nick. Oh, one time he goes, "Kevin, you're about as funny as a hole in the fence." Like, what? When he got off my brother's 10-speed bicycle, he goes, "Ew, that saddle's like a cheap hotel." Cheap hotel, $3 pistol. Okay, some of these I know came from his farming background. Like he'd say, "You're so educated, you're stupid." Or when I couldn't get my go-kart to work, he goes, "The loose nut is usually the one on the seat." And I go, "Dad, it worked yesterday." And he goes, "That's what the farmer said about his dead mule." Our neighbors, the Sloans, their dad used to mix and match his sayings, like, "It ain't rocket surgery for crying outside." Or, "I don't know whether to brush my butt or wipe my teeth," he'd say. Okay, I remember one day my dad's phrases were put to the test. Okay, we were on our way to swimming lessons, and my sister and her friend were in the front seat. My brother and I were in the back seat. And my dad said something was tight, like, a jar lid. And he goes, "Yeah, that jar lid was tighter than..." and then he stopped. Now, my brother and I knew many of his tighter than analogies, so we knew none of them were appropriate for this present company. And finally, my dad stammered out, tighter than the bark on a tree. And oh God, we laughed our heads off. We had to give him credit for the cobbled saying. Sometimes I wonder, am I getting Dad's phrases right? Like my neighbor, Misha, his name. He has a 9-year-old son, and he said the other day he was telling his son a joke. He said, a 3-legged dog walks into the bar and says, I'm looking for the man who shot my paw. Well, the next day he overhears his son telling one of his little friends, a 3-legged dog walks into the bar and says, I'm looking for the man who shot my dad. Both boys are laughing their heads off. So last summer, I'm helping my brother get a dock out of the lake, and there's a bolt that's rusted on. Man, we couldn't get that bolt loose. And finally my brother goes, that bolt is tighter than the bark on a tree. Oh God, we laughed our heads off. And I look up and my nephew is staring right at us, and I think, perfect. That phrase will live another generation. So I'm thinking about my dad now, of course, because I'm talking about him. And some things I know, like a $3 pistol's probably hot because it's cheap, you know, and it heats up. And Old Billy Ned's the devil, so when it's colder than the devil, it's and a cheap hotel has no ballroom. But some of them I'm still never going to figure out. But like Mr. Sloan would say, if you can't stand the heat, get off the pot.
Hummingbird, not a word, not a word. D'Artagnan of the summer yard, petit amour, hola, on guard, tasting the queen's tangerines beneath Flora's finest scene. Oh, you delicate gent with a tiny form, heaven sent. Heart beats poor like a rolling drum. Play your cadence with then up and away to the next kingdom.
When I was a kid, there were two kinds of fairy tales. Fairy tales I hated and fairy tales I hadn't heard yet. Because it always ended bad for the guy with the disability. I mean, look at Snow White trades in 7 perfectly good little ones for one big one. Like, the ugly duckling starts out great. It's a huge duck that steps on all the other ducks. But then they find out, no, he's really a swan. Oh man, I thought it was better when he was a duck, a huge uber duck. I mean, when they find out he's a swan, what does that do for me, a kid with a disability? I hope a ship of aliens lands and goes, no, you're really one of us. Meanwhile, I'm stuck living with ducks. So my grandma would say, no, Kevin, stories can turn out any way you want them to. That's why they were called folktales, because they would move and change with the folks. And you know what? I think I've got my grandmother to thank for being a storyteller. Because when I learned that, I started listening to rhetoric, how people talk. And when people would talk about my arm, they would call it withered or crippled or say, you poor thing, or what happened. But by the words they chose, I could tell whether they blamed me, my parents, God, or themselves for my condition. And with that information, I could get what I needed out of them. So I learned a lot from my grandma about rhetoric. And it's as much what people say as how they say it. And so I'm going to tell a story, a Grimm's fairy tale, but I added my own character to this because it's a folk tale. And it's a fool named Jack. And a fool has a foot in two worlds. That's why King Lear had a fool, was because he made good counsel. Because with a foot in two worlds, you have another perspective on this world. Clowns, don't listen to clowns. They don't make good counsel because they have 2 feet in another world. So they make good examples, but they don't make good counsel. And in the voting booth, always vote for the fool, never the clown. So this is a story, especially coming up. No. So this is a story called The 12 Princesses, with a little bit of work on my end of the deal. The 12 Princesses. Once upon a time there was a king, and he had 12 daughters, 12 princesses, and they adored their father and he adored them. One small problem. Every night they would go to bed, and in the morning, hanging on their doorknobs were 12 pair of shoes worn to threads. Well, this was running up a bill, so the king asked his daughters, "Where are you going at night?"
Whatever do you mean, Father?
Well, I don't know what you think I'm made of, but it's not what you're filling me with. I'm getting to the bottom of this. So, the king decided to make a royal edict. He said, whoever finds out where my daughters go at night gets half of my kingdom and any daughter he wishes to marry. But just to make sure only people of noble birth arrive, he said, if you fail, you will lose your head. Well, princes from all over the land showed up, figuring because of noble birth and that this was a fairy tale, they would certainly succeed. But every night they would fall asleep, so in the morning they would wake up, and when the king said, where do my daughters go at night? They wouldn't have a clue, and then no head to hold it in. So, due to fear, but mostly declining population, princes stopped coming. So the king decided to sweeten the pot. He created another edict. Whoever finds out where my daughters go at night gets my entire kingdom, any daughter he wishes to marry, and gets 3 nights to figure it out. To make sure it made it to the far realms of his kingdom, he put an ad in the paper. One day, Jack's mother was reading the paper to her son, Jack.
Oh, look, Jack, here's one. Wanted 1 cow. Will trade sack of magic beans. What fool would do that?
Jack looked down at his sack of magic beans. I think that's an old ad, Mother.
Oh, here's one. Single white princess, am into dwarves and apples. Am currently unconscious. Are you my Prince Charming? 1 kiss is all it takes. Ha, good luck, girlie. Oh, look, here's one. Whoa. King says, find out where my daughters go at night, and you may marry one of choice. Fail and lose head. Well, that king is nuts. Only a fool would.
His mother looked up to see him put on his knapsack.
What are you doing, Jack?
Well, you said only a fool. Clearly, I'm the man for the job. And Jack left his house.
They grow up so fast.
Now, Jack being Jack made a wrong turn, and soon he found himself in a deep, dark forest. There was moss hanging from the trees. Eyes seemed to peer behind every shadow. He came to a ramshackled house, and an old woman walked out onto the lawn, and the grass seemed to die at her feet.
Won't you come in?
And as she spoke, her eyeball fell out of its socket and hung down below. But instead of popping it back in, she reached behind her back and grabbed a hair and pulled that. And as she pulled the hair, the eye slid up and into the socket.
That's better. I have cookies.
Oh, all right, said Jack. And Into the house they went. Inside the house, the years dropped away. She stood tall and regal and beautiful.
Now I have you, Jack, and I may now reveal myself as Death. And you have set 2 feet in my house, where I may now claim you.
Not so fast, said Jack. He reached into his pocket where he had the beans. He put a little dirt in there to get them started, and he pulled it out, dropped it on the floor, put 1 foot on the dirt, 1 foot on the floor, and said, there, Dame Death, now I have 1 foot in my front yard and 1 foot in your house. She smiled. See, Death loves to be fooled because she knows sooner or later she's going to win.
I like you, Jack. You're a clever boy.
Even so, I must be on my way to the castle.
Oh, what a coincidence. Every night I send a bottle of wine to the castle.
Jack laughed, not because of the information, but because there's no such thing as a coincidence to a fool. He said, what kind of wine is this?
Well, it's a very special wine only I can make. And every bottle is a little death. 8 hours worth. Here, let me pour you some.
No thanks, said Jack. I must be going.
And I heard you were a fool. Very well. Goodbye, Jack. Or shall I say, till we meet again.
Oh, bye.
Oh, it's the other way.
Oh, thanks. Jack stopped at his house for a meal and a night in his own bed, and then made his way to the castle. The king took 1 look at Jack, turned to the executioner and said, clear your Wednesday morning. Then he showed Jack to his chambers. Jack waited in his chambers, and that night the 12 princesses came to visit. They brought with them a glass of wine.
To celebrate your courage and astonishing good luck.
Oh, how wonderful! And then Jack saw the bottle. The wine came in. It was the same bottle as from the Castle of Death. No thanks, said Jack. Wine keeps me awake at night, and I want to get to sleep so in the morning I can figure out where you go at night.
You're going to bed?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Good night. That was the easiest one yet.
Jack crawled into bed and pretended he was asleep. Later, the princesses came. They shook him. He did not wake. They shook him again. Again, he did not wake. See, you can always wake a sleeping man, but you can never wake a man pretending to sleep. Jack followed the princesses out the door and into the bowels of the castle, where awaited 6 boats, 2 princesses in each boat. Jack, quick as a hiccup, jumped into the last boat and pulled the blanket over himself. They made their way down the canal, out of the castle, and into this forest. But the leaves weren't green. No, the leaves were made of pure silver and pure gold. They made their way into another castle. The princesses got out of the boats, went through a curtain, up a passageway, through a door, and the most beautiful room Jack had ever seen. There was golden chandeliers, diamonds in the floor, and then he heard a familiar voice.
Hello, Jack. I'm glad to see you.
It was Death.
And aren't you a clever boy? I suppose you have dirt in your pocket.
Always, said Jack.
Here, put this on.
She gave Jack a mask.
Keep you my little secret.
Thank you. Jack put on the mask. You know, Death is kind of fun and a little bit seductive. Uh-oh.
How do you like my palace?
It's beautiful, but I thought you lived in that cottage.
Oh, that's my summer home. This is my true home.
Oh, and the people, look at them. They're so beautiful.
Well, they should be. It is the pick of the most handsome men in all of my kingdom. A little service I provide for taking them early in life. One night, the 12 princesses found us, and they have returned every night since. However, they possess the warmth of life, so they must keep dancing, or the chill of death will grab them.
That explains the shoes.
Enjoy yourself, Jack. If you are good above, this is your future.
Now I know where they go at night. Now is my chance to find a wife, because dancing is the best way to see if we're suited. So Jack walked up to the youngest daughter. How about we go dance?
No.
Oh, that didn't work. He asked the next daughter, would you like to dance?
No, thank you.
He asked the next 4 daughters, would you like to cut a rug?
No.
Kick the rafters?
No.
Trip the Light Fantastic?
No.
La Vida Loca?
No.
Oh, finally, Jack sat down dejected. How could he compete with these princes? Finally, he walked up to a middle daughter. I don't suppose you'd care to dance.
Fine, but not a slow dance.
Bingo! They made their way to the floor when suddenly...
Oh, I have to go.
What? No, our dance!
Oh, ask me again tomorrow.
No, but Jack followed them down into the bowels of the castle, into the boats, back to the castle of the king, where the king in the next morning asked, Jack, do you know where my daughters go at night? Jack wanted to finish his dance with the daughter, so he said, no, king, no, I do not know where your daughters go at night. That night, the daughters returned with the wine. Again, he went down into the waiting boat, again to the castle of death, where he walked up to the middle daughter. Remember me?
Oh, right, you.
You want to dance?
Sure.
So they made their way to the floor when, sorry about that. Oh, sorry, Jack kept stepping on her feet. So he asked the next daughter, ow, geez, ow, gotcha, ow. She stepped on his feet. The next daughter kept talking the whole time.
And then he was like, and it was awesome, and I couldn't believe it. It was so fun.
The next daughter had a laugh that sounded like glass breaking on a seagull. Oh, God, oh, geez, the next daughter didn't laugh at all.
Oh, no, that's very funny.
The next daughter picked her nose. The next daughter kept trying to pick Jack's nose. Geez, and finally, mercifully, the bell rang. Oh, thank goodness. And Jack made his way back to the castle. The next day when the king asked, Jack, do you know where my daughters go at night? Jack just wanted to get it over with. No, but he had one more daughter to ask, so he said, no, king, I don't know where your daughters go at night. That night, at the castle of death, Jack walked up to the eldest daughter and he asked, would you like to dance?
I'd love to.
And they made their way to the floor when she stumbled.
I'm sorry, I'm feeling faint. I've had little to eat.
Don't worry, I'll hold you tight so the chill of death can't grab you. And they danced until the color returned to her cheeks. She looked up but did not recognize Jack. Would you like to sit?
I dare not.
What is your name?
Anna.
And Jack and Anna danced again, this time much better. And they made their way down to the waiting boats. Jack kissed Anna's hand and watched as they pushed away and made their way up the canal when Jack heard the familiar voice.
Now I have you, Jack. The king will find your bed empty, and your life will be forfeit.
Just then, they saw a boat making its way back up the canal. It was Anna.
I forgot my wrap.
She ran through the curtain and up the passageway. Jack, quick as a hiccup, went underneath the blanket and pulled it over. Anna returned.
Oh, silly me, I brought no wrap tonight.
She got in the boat and they pushed away when Jack could hear in the distance.
Goodbye, Jack, until we meet again.
The next day, Jack stood before the king. And the king said, Jack, this is your last chance. Do you know where my daughters go at night? Jack paused and looked over at Anna, and their eyes met. And when they met, she smiled, and then Jack knew she'd come back for him on purpose. And so he said, yes, king, I do. I do know where your daughters go at night. And he relayed the entire story. And when he was done, the king said, Jack, you may have any daughter you wish to marry. And Jack said, if she'll have me, I would like to marry Anna. And she said,
I will.
And they were married. And they lived happily in the kingdom, and the kingdom flourished. And even into old age, some mornings, 2 pair of worn-out shoes were found outside their room. And on that day that death came calling, Jack and Anna went down into the bottom of the castle. They got in the waiting boats and made their way to the castle of death along the canal lined with trees of silver and gold.
Her beauty is a gift she would not have chosen. A secret everyone feels they know. canvas woods or time. She is beautiful in the dark, on the telephone. Her beauty, like a tool, like a crowbar, to pry herself from her hometown.
I remember watching the barn swallows on my grandparents' farm, these fork-tailed acrobats of the sky darting in and out of rafters, following roads only they could see, living life just ahead of their bodies. God, I wanted to feel that, a foot in two worlds. So I got a motorcycle. I love riding in the early morning before the earth trembles to life. I'm going to the store to get ice. Take the car, she would have said if I would have woke her up. And I'm off, riding in the cool morning, catching insects like a swallow, each gear taking me further from myself, ahead of timetables and committees, ahead of clocks and linoleum and administrations. So alive. And then I see the car in the intersection. I hit the brakes, and from my body, I flew. I was in the hospital and had a motorcycle accident on Lyndale and Lake Street, not far from here. And I had that experience people talk about where they say they see a light. Okay, I didn't see a light, but I was headed for this amazing sense of peace. And I was given the choice to follow the peace or to return to this plane of existence where it was clear even then there would be consequences. And I returned, and you know what? That has always really bothered me. I mean, why didn't I follow that peace? But I remember it, I was in Australia in 1987. It was so peaceful, so beautiful. I wanted to spend the rest of my life there, but my visa was running out, so I knew I'd have to return to the States. But that's when a woman named Ray said she would marry me so I could stay there. I just met her that day. She said, I don't care, I'll marry you. So I was going to marry Ray, but right before my visa ran out, right before our wedding, I said, Ray, I can't go through with this. I got to get back to the States. I got to get back to the belly of this beast where I can do something about the world I live in. And that's when I realized I need tension in my life. I mean, I'm the kind of guy that wears socks with sandals because I know it pisses people off. So I returned to this plane, and first returning, I was on morphine, and all these hallucinations came in. Birds. For some reason, my room was always full of birds, and so I started to write poems to try to make sense out of it. All these were birds, and the one that worried me most was the crows. The crows, because I know crows are harbingers of death or messengers to the underworld. So I was telling a buddy of mine, he's a shaman, and I said, Jamie, man, these crows keep coming and I'm so worried what it means. And he goes, no, he said, no, you've got it all wrong. He said, crows actually take away the things we don't want. So the next time they arrive, load them up with your fear and send it away. On wine dark seas the sleeps are deep. I am the dreamer and the dream. As Orpheus of Orpheus, I'm returning, I'm surfacing, I'm almost awake. And my shadow has moved from before me to directly above and now stretches out behind. You know, there are memories I have that pursue me, but when I turn, they disappear into the shadows. I cry now for lost dogs, but sometimes I hear them up ahead. Come on, I found something. When you're born into loss, you grow from it. But when you experience loss later in life, you grow toward it. You have to become the person you've become. There's this great folktale about a man who goes into town once a month. And one time he's in town and he finds a mirror. Okay, he's never seen a mirror before. So he looks in it and he thinks it's a picture of his father. So he brings it home and he puts it under his bed. And the next week, his wife is cleaning, and she finds the mirror. She looks in. Oh, it's a picture of a woman. Obviously, the woman her husband is having an affair with in town. This looks just like the kind of hussy he would fall for. A huge fight breaks out, a frying pan's involved, and then no, it's a looking glass. A neighbor says, no, it's a mirror. Now they're in love again, and she gets a bag of ice for his head. But it's true, we don't believe what we see what we believe. Just like the couple, we see what we believe. Like Lazarus. When Lazarus was buried underground, Jesus couldn't even raise him from the dead till he removed the shroud of death. Because Jesus said, as long as Lazarus believes he's dead, he will always be dead. I've worked more frequently with prisons these days, and you're all issued when you leave prison a suit. It's the suit that everybody knows, blue suit, this red tie, and all the guys who've been in prison recognize that suit. And they tell the guys coming out, get out of that suit as fast as you can, because as long as you're wearing it, you're still in prison. To survive, we must not only follow a light, but find solace in the mysteries. We must expand our boundaries, find strength in our vulnerability, peace in paradox, because sometimes the answer is there is no answer.
On his 90th year, or 91, Abraham took up his blessed son, put him on the rock as the Lord had bade, closed his eyes and raised the blade. Mercy on Abraham, mercy on Abraham, raised his knife and split the world in two. Mercy on Abraham, mercy
They say that those who don't read history are doomed to repeat it, and those who do read history are doomed by those who don't. In 1987, I was in Czechoslovakia. It was a communist country then. And I was there with the Actors Theater of Louisville. We were the first American theater there in 15 years. And I was going to perform one of their plays, but I was also going to get to perform my own one-person show called 21A that I wrote here. And I couldn't wait to get to do one of my plays in communist Czechoslovakia. So I flew to Louisville, we rehearsed, and then one day they had a big meeting, all of the actors, technicians, stage managers. We were to be briefed by a member of the government. A member of the IFS was coming to tell us the do's and don'ts of visiting a communist country. So a member of the IFS came, blue suit, blue tie, briefcase, and he slammed the briefcase on the table and he goes, "We're not going to have another Moscow incident here, are we?" And he goes, "We're not going to have another Moscow incident here, are we? Where Sergeant Longtree let those prostitutes in our embassy in Moscow and they took photographs of our secret documents. We're not going to have another Moscow incident here, are we?" And we're like, "Well, we're a bunch of actors. What are we going to do? Give away secrets on O'Neill?" And he goes, "And there are no drugs. I know you actors. There's no drugs in Czechoslovakia." And he's looking right at me, and I'm like, how did he know about the 70s? And he's saying, no drugs, and then no fraternizing. I think you know what I mean by fraternizing. And his eyebrows go up and down. And he goes, and no Kafka. He said, "Kafka's been banned." Right? No Kafka? What are we going to do for fun? And then he goes, "And your play's been banned." He points at me, he says, "Your play was banned in Czechoslovakia." And that's when I found out my play was banned there. I'm like, "I've been banned. Wait a minute, I must have written something. I've been banned." And he goes, "There are no homosexuals. I know you actors, and there are no homosexuals in Czechoslovakia." Our company manager is gay, and we fly to Prague. We get off the plane. He walks down the street, comes back, and says, 7. We're on a bus, and we're going from Prague to Brno, where we're to perform. And on the way, this car comes behind us. Be-doo, be-doo, be-doo. It's a cop car. And he pulls us over, and a cop gets on our bus, and he says, "Does anyone here speak Czech?" And nobody says anything. I know at least 3 people on that bus do speak Czech. He says, "Who here speaks Czech?" Nothing. Finally, "Who here speaks Czech?" And Michael Zintovsky raises his hand. Michael Zintovsky is the toughest man I have ever met. And Michael and this cop get off the bus, and they go to the cop car. The cop is talking, and Michael is taking out a cigarette. And now I see him shaking. And as the cigarette burns, the ash drops on his shirt and his pants. Michael gets back on the bus, sits next to me, and lets out this huge sigh. And he sees that I've been looking at him, and he goes, "I'm a member of the jazz club." I go, "What?" He goes, "I'm a member of the jazz club. We're an artist organization. We are going to change this country. Our leader is Václav Havel. You know Václav Havel." And at the time I didn't. I said, "No." He said, "When he gets out of prison, we will change this country." So we set up in a museum in the town of Brno, and Michael's up in a little booth. And as we perform on stage, he says our words in Czech that runs through these headsets all the audience members wear. Oh, and we sell out every show because we got a bad review. Bad review, communist paper, got to be a good show, pack. And after one show, they said, "Come on, we're going to a party." So I go with this group of actors to this party, and Michael walks in. They don't call him Michael. They call him Lou Reed, because he'd memorized all of Lou Reed's music, and who was banned there. So he would sing Lou Reed's songs all night long. That night, I met Joni Mitchell and Bob Dylan. And they asked me my name. I said, "Kevin." They go, "No, do you know anyone? Do you know anyone that's been banned here?" The only song I could think of was Ziggy Stardust by David Bowie. So I was David Bowie, and I loved that. And later that night, they go, "Come on." It was 3 a.m. They go, "Come on, we got to see this performance artist. He is amazing. He's going to blow your mind." So we all got in our cars and drove to this park where this guy was to perform this dissident underground performance. So we went, and we were instructed to put our cars in a circle around this mound of dirt. And we're sitting there, and the lights all on this dirt. And pretty soon, it's 3:05, 3:10, something's wrong, something's terribly wrong. Zoom, 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 everyone zooms away. Everyone's a nervous wreck. We found out the next day he was there. He was in the mound of dirt breathing out of a straw. That was his piece. And everyone's like, brilliant, brilliant. So then I told them, hey, my play's been banned. My play was banned here too. They said, then we must do it. So I did my play at 3 in the morning in that same museum. Michael up in his booth again, and this time the whole audience packed. Were all dissidents, all people that were there putting themselves in danger to be at that show. And when the play was done, they didn't even clap, they hopped up. We had this massive hug right there in the middle of that stage, and this incredible hug. The fear started to set in. I could feel it like a tiny spark start to build, because I knew I'd put every one of those people in danger by performing. I wasn't in danger. I mean, I was an American, and what was I doing? What was I thinking? I get back to my room, and I take the receiver off my phone, because I told it had probably been bugged. And sure enough, you could see it right in there. There was the bug. And I thought, did I tell anyone over the phone about this show? And the next day at the museum, I started counting heads. Oh, good, she's here. He's here. Where is that guy? Where'd he go? And they go, he's out having lunch. And I was a nervous wreck until that guy came back. And that night there was no getting to sleep. I'd wake up in these cold sweats all night long. And the next night I couldn't even get to sleep. So you know what? I turned myself in. It worked like a charm. I turned myself in. But I didn't go to the Czech ambassador. I went to the American ambassador in Prague. At least I did that. And I said, look, I did my play. I know I put these people in danger. You got to tell me what I can do. And the American ambassador said, first of all, stop worrying. They didn't ban your play, we did. He goes, we don't like the way your play portrays America. While I was there, I was talking to Michael, and I said, Michael, do you ever hope to be free? He goes, I know we'll be free. He said, as soon as they elected a Polish pope, he said, I knew it was just a matter of time. And he said, I'm not worried about us, I'm worried about you. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, when you don't have a place to send your fear, it's going to come home. Sure enough, 2 years later, 1989, the Berlin Wall is coming down. Czechoslovakia is free. They've had their Velvet Revolution, a revolution where not one shot was fired. And what they've done is all these artists went underground. Michael, all his friends, Václav Havel, even the symphony, the Sydney Symphony, or not the Sydney, the Prague Symphony went underground with these guys. And the people had lived without freedom, but they weren't going to live without their music. And the people stopped working, and that's when the Velvet Revolution had begun. But I'll never forget Michael's words, because a month after that, the NEA put the obscenity clause in the National Endowment for the Arts. All of a sudden, the fear had started to come home.
I was dreaming in my dreaming of an aspect bright and fair, and my sleeping, it was broken, but my dream, it lingered near in the form of shining valleys where the pure air recognized, and my senses newly opened, I awakened to the cry that the people have the power to redeem the work of fools upon the meek. The graces shower, it's decreed, the people rule. Vengeful aspects became suspect and bending low as if to hear, and the armies ceased advancing because the people had their ear, and the shepherd and the soldier lay beneath among the stars, exchanging visions and laying arms to waste in the dust, in the form of shining valleys where the pure air recognized, and my senses newly opened, I awakened to the cry that people have
of resiliency is maintaining one shape. And how do we maintain our shape when it's been compromised? It's usually through family, through faith, through community, but sometimes we build walls. We protect our outer landscapes with fences and houses, and our inner landscapes with rules and beliefs and administrations. Memory becomes alibi or evidence. But walls erode, they crumble. Like truth and beauty, walls are fleeting, and we can't grow when our boundaries are concrete. We can only learn through risk, on the fringes, through leaps of faith, through vulnerability, expanding our boundaries of understanding through questions. The Greeks felt in order to heal, we needed to listen. That music ran through everything. They called it the music of the spheres. Everything emitted a bit of music. And when you were in health, you were in harmony with the universe. There were these places called oneric spaces. This is one of my favorite things. It's where dream and reality come together. And they're those spaces, they were healing places. One was called Epidaurus in Greece. And you would go there to listen to your body, and your body would tell you how it needed to heal. And doctors would hide behind walls or peek through holes. Doctors in those days were listeners. I think we haven't lost the ability to hear the music, but I do think we've lost the ability to recognize the music. That grace isn't a touch with the divine. Grace is discovering the divine in the everyday. We need to find our oneric spaces. For me, it's the lakes of Minnesota. I'll be at a lake in Minnesota, and man, my blood pressure drops. I can hear a bee flying past. I can hear the water lapping, a chainsaw across the lake. We all have that place, an ocean, a mountain, a desert, that place that gives us solace. And the lake is that for me. Our name, Minnesota, means it's an oneric space. Minnesota is from the Lakota, and it means where sky and water meet, an oneric space, a place of reflection. Now, how our lakes were created is still open for debate. Scientists seem to think that it was a receding ice shelf that left potholes that filled with water. Others, mostly chambers of commerce, think that it's the footprint of a giant ox named Babe. How they were created, we don't know. But we do have a lake of legend, and that is for certain. Lake Superior, Gitchigumi, holds 1/10 of the world's fresh water supply, that one lake. And we didn't find its depth until 15 years after we'd walked on the moon. I grew up by a lake. We fished for bullheads, and when the ice would freeze, we would wait till it held a kid named Pat Gilligan, and then we knew we could play hockey. Later on, my brother and I, we got a speedboat. We thought the way to a girl's heart was to do never-seen-before water skiing stunts. I'm telling you, the Discovery Channel's got nothing in mating rituals compared to a kid on Lake Minnetonka. Later on, my brother and I, we would go with my dad to northern Minnesota to go up to the Boundary Waters, and we'd park our car in front of a bait store that had a sign that said, "Our minnows are guaranteed to catch fish or die trying." I remember in the morning I had to go to the bathroom so bad. I ran into the bar, but I went to where the restrooms were, but I couldn't tell by the way they were marked. Am I a pointer or a setter? Am I a pointer or a setter? We get back in the car and we drive to Lake One and put in our boat. These were the days you could dip your cup right in the water and take a drink. And at night, we would hear the wolves howl. We'd hear loons. And my dad, type A, never more at peace than in northern Minnesota. One day, I'm watching him fish, and his bobber's going under. And I'm thinking, why doesn't Dad set the hook? Why doesn't he pull that fish in? And I look at the end of his rod, there was a yellow butterfly. Dad would rather let that fish get away than disturb that butterfly. At night, we'd see shooting stars, sometimes the northern lights, and we were transported to that place before the trappers, before the first people, before those lakes had names. My brother still lives on the lake we grew up. He never leaves the state. We can't get him to travel, because he always says, I'd go somewhere, but it would be here. I still like to ice fish. We used to call ice fishing sitting around practicing for when we got old, and now we call it sitting around. I remember a buddy of mine, when I travel, I tell people about ice fishing because they still don't believe we actually do it. And I tell them there's a shack that's a little bigger than this rug. There's a stove in there so you can be dressed just like this and you're fine, warm. And there's holes in every corner and that's what you fish out. And you never know what you're going to catch. A buddy of mine a few winters back said he nailed something. He said he couldn't believe how big it was. And he was fighting. Finally he got it to come in and he got it in and he looked. And it was a license plate, and he threw it in the corner. He grabbed it and ran outside to see the hole in the ice where his truck used to be. One time I was out ice fishing. I was fishing, it was like 10 degrees, I was freezing, I was much younger, but I didn't have an ice house. But I was nailing the crappies, so I couldn't go in, I'm just catching them. All of a sudden, about a dozen cars come out, they circle around me. People got out, they set up tables, a croquet set, volleyball. They set up 2 shacks, but they weren't for fishing. One was a changing room and one was a sauna. And I saw this huge man get in the changing room, then run across without anything on into the sauna while his buddy started a chainsaw and cut a hole in the lake. Then this huge man, red with steam coming out, comes running out of the sauna. Woo! And he jumped in that hole in the ice. And they invited me over and I had one of the best days of my life. I had a biology teacher that used to say I was like Lake Mille Lacs. Not very deep, and I went on forever. I still I go to lakes when something happens. When something in my life affects me, I have to go to a lake. When my dad passed away, I rented a boat and I went to this lake, and I sat on this lake and I just waited, and I knew the peace would come. And I sat as the mist was coming in, and it was that time of night that truly was oniric, where dream and reality came together as one. And I sat there on that clear glass lake, and my thoughts dove down through the surface, down to the treasures, down to the solace of the depths. And then I was on the surface again, where sky and water meet. If the lake is visible and the wind is unseen, we ride the waves. When a hero comes home from their journey, home is never the same as when they left. I was in the 1970s, I lived in the uptown area, and I'm here to tell you it's really different. I mean, there was a hardware store there on Lake and Hennepin. I remember there was a place called Barbie Sauna, where we used to say for $20 you could get anything but Barbie or a sauna. And the Bryant Lake Bowl was a bowling alley with human pin setters when I first started going there. You could see these junior high legs straddling the pins. And where all the tables are in there now, they were all pool tables. And it was where the guys would come early in the morning to drink after their shifts. And I worked in a chow mein factory in the uptown area, and they called me college boy because I could read. And after work, I would go to the uptown bar, which was very different. Oh my gosh, the uptown bar, I remember there were bee girls there. And bee girls were women who would sit at the counter, and for $20 an hour, they would talk with you. They had the art of conversation. And I remember I overheard a bee girl tell another bee girl one time, "I like my men like my coffee. Stupid." And I'd always go in there and meet my buddy Larry. Larry was always there. He was always in the uptown. But one Saturday afternoon, I go in there, Larry isn't there. This was a first, I'm not kidding. And I go to the bartender, I go, "Man, where's Larry?" And he goes, "He's never here on Saturday afternoons." And then I remembered, yeah, I'm never there either on Saturdays. And I go, "Well, when will he be back?" He goes, "Oh, he'll be back around 5. Sure enough, 5 o'clock, Larry walks in the door. And I go, "Larry, where were you?" And he says, "I was out sitting with the cows." I go, "Larry, why were you sitting with cows?" And he says, "Well, you don't know this. Years ago," he says, "I used to work in the stockyards in St. Paul." He says, "In fact, I was on the killing floor." And he said, "It came in on a hoof, left in plastic." And he said, "You would not believe what you can get used to." He said, the air. He said, "It wasn't that it was a foul smell." He said, "It was thick." He said, "It was so thick that it would make you sick." He said, "But after a while, you kind of got used to it. And then you got so you craved it. Then it got to where you couldn't wait to get to work to breathe that rich, real air. It fed you, and all other air became insufficient." He said, "You know, you can get used to pretty much anything." So he says, on Saturdays now, after I quit, I go out into the country and I sit with the cows. And I go, "What do you do, Larry?" He goes, "Well, I ask their forgiveness." And I said, "What do they say, Larry?" He goes, "Well, not much," but he said, "It'd be surprising how forgiving a cow can be." And not long ago, my wife Mary and I got a horse. It's actually a pony called a Dale's pony. And we got him, we didn't even have him a week, and he ate some poisonous plant, like white snake root, we think, and he was down. And the vet called us to come in. We thought he was telling us to come in and visit. The vet told us later he was calling us to say goodbye. So I'm sitting there with this tiny horse. He was a baby, like barely bigger than a dog, and his head's in my lap. And this is the first horse I've ever known, and now I'm saying goodbye. And Mary says, "I gotta leave, but Zeus, if you have to go, it's okay, but we wish you'd stay." And she left the room, and Zeus stood up. And the vet went, "Keep him standing. Whatever you do, keep him standing." So I did everything. I'm feeding him apples. I'm singing, "The sun will come out tomorrow." I mean, just keeping him up. And the vet couldn't believe it. The vet goes, "A modern horse would have died." He said it was his ancient immune system that saved him. And then I thought, what immune systems are we carrying from our ancestors that say fight or flight? What immune systems do we carry with us that keep us alive? So we got Zeus out at this farm now in Long Lake. It's where the cops keep their horses and the Shriners. In fact, the RNC, the Republican Convention a few years back, we helped the cops train the horses for protesters. We sat there with signs and we shouted manifestos and yelled, and the horses would come up to us, and right before they got to us, we'd quick pull out carrots, and the horses would come up. They loved protesters. And so I'm out visiting Zeus one day, and they said, you know, you can visit him in the field and feed him apples, but look out, there's one horse you got to look out for, because he will try to kill you. He was beaten as a child by a man, and so if you're a man, he will try to kill you. So I'm feeding Zeus these apples, and I feel this horse, and I'm pushing away, and I look, it's that horse, that man-killer horse. And I'm sitting there watching the horse, and he goes around behind me, and he comes up on my right side, and then he lays his head against my paralyzed arm and just left it there. Like, I know. I still bring that horse apples, and as far as I know, I'm the only man that can get near him. A friend of mine who works with guys returning from Vietnam and Afghanistan says, the sentence that has saved more lives than any other is, you will find love again. According to the Tibetan Book of the Living and Dead, all the love we give out in life is returned to us as we leave this plane to the next. In a hero's journey, this is very important. The main lesson in a victory is found in what is lost. Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, most beautiful creature on the planet, is always surrounded by her handmaids named Shame and Desire. Irony. Sometimes an angel comes to wrestle. The Ojibwe in their committee meetings used to have what they called irony dogs. They were dogs actually trained to bark when there was no irony in the room. Paradox. We need paradox to keep our balance. What ghosts escape with us when we come home? Ghosts are anything that can't find a home, that go bump in our hearts and minds. And we all carry them. We all carry them when we come back from our journeys. Okay, I'm sitting in a coffee shop. I'm going through bus change. This is a strange looking ritual. But after my accident, I've got to be ready for when the bus comes to spring into action. As careful as I am, a quarter falls to the floor. If I could take off my shoe and sock, I could get it. My feet have become downright prehensile over the last few months. Not that I can deal around a blackjack, and I totally understand it if you don't want me to open your can of Sprite. But I could get that quarter. What's the proper etiquette here? And I feel people around me are beautiful and healthy and smoking. And I that am rudely stamped, like Shakespeare's Richard III would say, unfinished, sent before my time into this world scarce half made up, since I cannot prove a lover to entertain these fair, well-spoken days, I'm determined to prove a villain. In other words, sometimes you just lose it. But not today. I let the quarter go. I know part of disability is frustration. Like my humor. My humor has actually gotten a bit darker since my accident. In fact, there's jokes I tell at home that Mary says never tell those in public, so here's one. These are based on those you might be a redneck if jokes. Like, what is it? You might be a redneck if your dream home's stuck in traffic, like that. These are you might have a disability if jokes. And one of mine is, you might have a disability if you've ever turned to your lover and said, ooh, that feels good. Is that your arm or mine? Okay, Mary might be right. All right. But if you take one thing from tonight, if you take one thing from my stories, let it be this. If you ever find yourself in a state of loss, in a state of trauma, please find an advocate, someone that can speak clearly for you in times of need, because I'm here to tell you, if you don't find a person, you will develop a persona. Somebody you don't like very much, but will get the job done. For me, it was Richard III. I saw a production of Richard III. I went, oh, this guy's great. He was ruthless and fun to watch. And he did a bit where he put a glove on with one hand that sent the audience into hysterics. I thought, man, if this place saw me put my socks on, there wouldn't be a dry seat in the house. But I loved Richard because he was so ruthless. But I don't want my Richard from England. No, I want my Richard from Minnesota. So I call mine Dick the Turd. And when I need something done, I call on Dick the Turd, and man, he gets it done. But Richard never found love. He says in his first soliloquy, the reason for all of his vengeance is he never found someone to love. And love is imperative. It's like Frankenstein. Frankenstein was created by Dr. Frankenstein. He went out looking for love. When he didn't find it, he came back and pleaded for him to make someone to love. Make me someone to have and hold. And this is when Dr. Frankenstein learned the dilemma of creation. When you've created a monster, how do you stop? Mary Shelley wrote that book when she was 19 years old. How did she know so much about guys? My favorite ending is The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and I love this ending because it takes place in a cemetery for people that were executed for crimes, and this charnel house is already much dilapidated. The beams are worm-eaten, the pillars are green with mold, and the chains are rusted. And to this deep charnel house, where so many human remains have rotted in company, where so many great ones and so many innocents have contributed their bones, this is what we've learned of Quasimodo. About 18 months or 2 years after the termination of this story, among all those hideous carcasses, 2 skeletons were found, one which held the other in its embrace. Now, one of those skeletons was that of a woman, but the other that held that one in its embrace was that of a man. It was discovered his vertebrae were crooked, his head set on one shoulder blade, one leg was shorter than the other. But more importantly, there was no break at the nape of the neck. In other words, he had not been hanged. He had come to this place and had died there. When they tried to separate him from the one he held into his brace, he fell to dust. So there we have it. Beauty embraced by the grotesque hanging onto beauty, light surrounded by shadow, and our lives rounded by a little sleep. I'm learning a lot from this accident. It's a gift, and not a gift I would have chosen for myself. I get angry at heartless actions. It takes very little to make me cry, but most of all, I do not want to become Richard III. But I can see how it happens. Back in the coffee shop, I take out another quarter and I head to the bus stop. You know, I think my favorite Bible story is Ruth. And I love this story because Ruth chooses her religion. She isn't born into it, or God doesn't come and visit her. She chooses her religion, and she chooses it through love. That's why she chooses her religion. And so this poem is called Ruth. It's written supposedly by her husband. Ruth. What turn did I make from the path I was on to the one I now take? I saw you and I knew it was true. And before curiosity could interrupt, before knowledge could corrupt, I stepped away from the lamp and what I understand, reached out in the dark for your hand. For love is a step, a slip, a trip. I love the way you part your teeth down the middle. I ain't lying. Love might not be boastful or rude, but I am. Rejoice, you whisper. I choose you. Rejoice, I whisper. I choose you. And I uncovered your feet one night in a field before wrong, before right. And you said, where you go, I'll go. And where you lodge, I'll lodge. And your people will be mine and your God, my God. And the tree of knowledge will build our marriage bed, cradle, coffin. And its limbs hold us often and long after the gales of cries and laughter. And when my new face is an old face, and my old face is my new face. With you by my side in that state of grace that's found in a sandwich split in half. A shared look, a language, a laugh. Until that day when God will call us my wife, my mystery, protector of my solace. Some hearts are bought with prayers and others with blood. But all I want is your love. So thanks everybody for coming out. On behalf of all of us up here, thank you so much. I want to close with a really quick little poem. And this poem is based on the information that this planet doesn't have enough minerals to create life. So carbon and different kinds of minerals, gold, had to fall from the sky, from comets and heavenly bodies to form living creatures. And so if that's true, we're all pieces of stars in this room. And if that's true, this is a constellation, unique unto this night. And so this poem is all the things I've learned while spending time with different constellations. There are families I share my blood, and there's families I would give my blood. I've learned that love thrives in audacity, dies in carelessness, and hides in simple gestures. I've learned that knowledge is acquired, but wisdom is recognized. And there's the trip you plan, and then there's that trip you take. And home has gone from a place that is to one I remember to one I now create, where I know the names of the gods, what's funny, what's sacred, and where I will find you. So I'm sitting on my Father's knee, reaching up to those stars. But I know now that though not burning any longer, some still send their light. So I'm reaching to the past and the future. I'm reaching to home. And somewhere between where I sit and they send their light, we meet. Me reaching to the heavens and the stars looking down at what it's like to be